Alright, so moving on to step 2. We have previously built our base. We've got one of our end stops built into it. And now we're going to be working on the main deck. And so what we need for that is 8 of the white zip ties, 16 of the 632 half-inch bolts, screws, 16 of the 632 nuts, and 16 of the number 6 washers. Also need 4 of the LM-UU8 linear bearings. Basically there's 8 of these guys and 4 of the LM-UU12. You'll notice the ones that come in the white box, those are the 12s. The ones that come in little pairs of plastic bags, those are the 8s. So you need 4 of the 8s. It is suggested that you actually mount these with the linear rods inside the bearings, just to kind of keep things straight and make sure you have things aligned. All this stuff has oil on it, so kind of be careful what you touch as you go. Make sure you have some paper towels as well. So this is basically what we need. What we're going to do is mount the linear bearings into these 4 slots right here using these zip ties. You've probably all seen the pictures before on how that goes. So we're going to be doing that by running the zip ties through these little tiny slots that are on either side of the larger rectangular cutout that ultimately holds these bearings in place, like so. And like I said, we're going to be using the actual rods to hold these kind of straight as we tie them down. And then we're going to go from there and actually place the deck onto the base. Then we'll start looking like we have the starts of a Printrbot. Alright, so moving along, what I've done is I have placed these 4 linear bearings into the rectangles. Some of them will just slide right in, some need a little emphasis to get them in. Some of these just kind of just sit perfectly. Other ones, they're holding in there pretty good, so it did require a little force to kind of push those in. But whether or not they actually stay in on their own, we still need to tie them down with these zip ties. And again, just for orientation purposes, I have my base with the front pointing towards me. And because of that, just to keep everything the same, I have the arrows now pointing towards me, coming this way, and the holes for the other end stop spacers are still on the left hand side over here. So just so you have the same orientation that I do as I go through this process. Now there's debate about whether or not this part of the zip tie should actually be on the outside or the inside. Obviously if it's underneath, then it's going to look better because all you'll have is just the part wrapping around the bearing. If you have them on the outside though, it makes it easier to retighten the zip ties after you have been running this for a few hours, and apparently that's a pretty good idea. So that's the approach that I'm going to take. You can make your own decision as to what you want to do. So again, the suggestion is that you run these linear rods through the bearings so that when you tie everything down, everything is already sort of lined up. And as you can see, I seem to be having little balls coming out, meaning that the bearings are coming apart on me. That's definitely not good. However, since we don't really have any further choice at this point, we will have to continue. So what we're going to do is take these little slots, and again be careful because these will have a tendency to slide out. There are some options for preventing that, but they're fairly complicated. You can find them in the wiki if you want to put the little plastic pieces on there to keep them from falling out. You can do that, but I'm just going to go for being a little more careful as I proceed. So basically those little tiny rectangular slots that are next to the bearing rectangles, you want to introduce from the top down into the hole. So you can see it just drops right in, and from the bottom, I don't want to flip this over because everything will come out, but basically we're threading this back through the one that's on the opposite side of the bearing, and as you can see it's just coming up. This is not terribly complicated, but you do want to make sure that you get these bearings in there correctly, regardless of whether the little bearing balls are falling out as we build this thing, and may have to replace these bearings somewhere down the road. So I imagine they're going to get a little on the noisy side. So what we're going to do is put this part of the wire tie, zip tie, towards the outer edge. It'll make it easier to kind of yank on it and tighten it from that perspective, rather than having it on the inside, one which we can't get to later on with the printer bed in place and that sort of thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to finish up getting the rest of these in place before I do too much tightening. The key thing is to make sure that you're always getting the correct orientation of these things. Basically, it makes sense because you're just getting the angle of that so that it scoops and then wraps around like that. Otherwise, you won't be able to actually zip it closed. So just drop that through there. And check for positioning. And imagine after you've done the first couple of these, it really shouldn't take terribly long to do the whole set. See, that's a fourth of them already, and that's with me explaining everything. So I'm just going to zip through the rest of these, no pun intended, or perhaps. And there may be an optimized way of doing it, getting them all started and then doing all the bottom parts, but I'm not feeling too creative right now, especially with the little bearing balls falling out. That's somewhat annoying, especially since I have read about such things happening on the forum, so it seems I'm the victim of some of the same experiences that other people have seen. Unfortunately, I didn't have as much of a problem with the other parts, at least so far, being missing or damaged, but it looks like the bearings are continuing to be a problem, even at this late stage of the Kickstarter deliveries. And so we have half of them done. So making sure that on this opposite side that we come in from the other direction, dropping that through, and let's see if we can do it blind, and that's just going to take too much time, so do that, and let's see if I can do this a little quicker like I was thinking. Just get them all started on this side, go in the same direction, and I guess it would help if you guys could actually see it. And then coming through on the other side. Just pulling them up so they don't fall out from gravity. And the last one. Yeah, that's definitely speedier. So now I can set it back down. Get a little more slack back up. And again, kind of pulling that down that direction. So that we can grab on later on and tighten those up some more. Eventually maybe we can cut off the majority of the tail there. But for now we definitely want to leave it on so we can tighten it after it's been running for a little bit. And so now I'll come back over on this side here, and we will just kind of grab the main block there with our thumb and then yank on the tail. Kind of pull it as tight as we can for now. You should hear it snap a few more positions depending on how far you originally locked it down. Shouldn't take very long at all. You kind of want to have these down as low as possible. Not only does it look better, but it'll keep everything nice and flat. And finally this last one, just tighten, and push it down. And now we have our bearings in place with the rods, ensuring that we've kept everything nice and aligned along the way. So now the next step is going to be taking the base plate and actually attaching it to the deck piece. So that's the next step we'll cover with all this hardware: 16 1/2 inch, 16 of the 632 nuts, and 16 of the number 6 washers. Alright, so like I mentioned, we are attaching the deck, which we now have the linear bearings mounted on into. I'm leaving the rods in there for now, since we did have the issue with the balls falling out of the bearings, or at least 3 falling out of 2 different ones. So I'd rather not have any more come out and remove these rods if I have to. So I'm going to leave them in there for now. So what I'm going to do is attach this deck to the base, and again keeping in mind that I now have the front of the printer facing towards me, so that means all of these arrows that are inside and everything are now facing towards me, and the deck itself, although they're covered up by the tails of the zip ties, the arrows here and here are pointing towards me now. So make sure you have that orientation like that, and you should have these little double pairs of holes to your left hand side if everything is correct, as well as the 8mm hole, which is only one of them in one of the corners. That should be on your left hand side towards the back, and again that should go right over the end stop that we installed earlier. So that's the orientation that we've got, and if everything is correct, it should, as you can see just by looking at the way that these are set up, that all of the slots and tabs are going to match up. Same with the front side. You can see that matches there, that matches there, and so forth. So really it's just a matter of dropping this on here and getting all of the tabs and slots to line up, and As usual, this may take a little bit of force in some places, or it may just slide right on. Just depends on how cooperative the laser cutter was being and how humid and hot it is or isn't in your area. In my case, I did do the tinting, but it should have no effect whatsoever, causing no swelling, no grain lifting, none of that sort of thing. And that's why I chose that particular process to do the coloring of this. So it looks like I've got most of these started, with the exception of this last little corner. So I'm going to turn this around a little bit just so I can get better access to it and kind of push and wiggle things a bit, so hopefully I can get things lined up a little bit better. And coax it along on some of these. So everything looks good except for this one corner. This definitely may take a little more persuasion. I'm going to lift some of these back up because I definitely don't want to put too much pressure on the other ones. And see what I can do to get those last ones to line up. And again, you may or may not have any difficulties, or you may have to play around with it for a little bit to get things to square up perfectly. We are dealing with wood, and wood does have its own mind at times. It'll tend to warp or do its own thing, again depending on the weather and what have you. Alright, so rather than making you watch through my banging on this and to submission, I will pause this until I get this thing laying down flat, and then we'll come back and do the hardware aspect of it. Not very exciting watching me beat the crap out of this thing, so I will be back. Okay, that actually didn't take very long at all. It was only about a minute since I last stopped recording, so as you can see, I now have everything in place as far as these 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16. Okay, it matches up just like the number of screws and nuts and washers like I mentioned. So we are ready to complete this step. We got the deck placed on top of the base plate. Everything is connected with the tab and slots. However, we need to actually make these semi-permanent with the hardware. Again, we are using 16 of the 1/2 inch 632 screws, 16 of the number 6 washers, and 16 of the 632 hex nuts. So to save some time, I went ahead and just put the washers on all of these, and I'm going to go ahead and attach all of these using a crisscross pattern, just so that everything kind of evenly gets situated. Again, I've already put the nut in here on the side, being careful not to let these slide out. I'm just going to keep those in there as long as I can anyway. And again, be careful to make sure that the washers seat as evenly as possible between the different sides so that you don't have them angling in one direction or another, because then it sort of defeats the purpose of having the washer. So just something to kind of keep an eye on. And you don't want to overly tighten these at this point. Right now, really, the only screws that should be tightened up are these ones that are on the sides, on both sides, because those are pretty much ready to be tightened down. So for now, we are just going to sort of hand tight these so that we can adjust things as we go on later. So again, I'm going to go back and forth. So while not the most convenient, it's going to allow us to have an even pressure put across the deck as we tighten this down. We don't want any side popping up as we go. And some of these are going to be a little more difficult to get access to. You won't be able to do the pinch method as easily, and you'll find that the nuts are going to want to fall through in some cases. So a little bit of patience is required. And depending on how fast this goes, I may end up editing the video so it's sort of like a time lapse, so you don't have to watch me actually screw down all these, unless you find that entertaining. Now let's get these four slightly more challenging ones. Looks like we sort of have access in here, but it might be easier to push it from the center. It's a good thing we don't have the printer board or any of the motors in here, or we would never get access to these slots. In fact, with the bearing zip ties in there, it's a bit of an issue. So, not sure if you can actually see in there, maybe with the light coming through there, to see which holes I'm actually talking about. These are the ones that are up towards the top area. Yeah, those ones at the very top that look like little crosses. That's where we need to get the nuts, and it's a little difficult getting your fingers deeply enough in there that you can not only position the nut but keep it from sliding out the other side. I would highly suggest doing the pre-taping method on this particular one, and I think that's something that they've suggested on the forums and website, and maybe even some of the original videos from Brooke had them pre-taped. I finally got one, but as you can see how long that took to get situated. It's not something you want to have to fight. Basically trying to make sure that the nut stays even on both sides of that slot. Okay, finally got one of them. Let's see if we can follow a similar tactic for this other one. I'm not sure what that tactic was. I think I just got lucky. I think if I were to assemble another one, I would absolutely do some more taping. Okay, so I'm going to pause the video as I finish the rest of these because there's no need for you guys to watch me suffer through my mistake of not taping these. So I will get these finished up and then we will move forward with the next step. Alright, so that took a couple more minutes, but just to prove to you guys that I did finally get those two there and the two there finally seated in there. And you can see from the inside, it's definitely seated. There's a little bit of a problem with the end stop on there. That was the worst of the bunch, but I finally got around there. So that's it for this step. We'll move on to the next one where we'll install another end stop and start adding some motors.